You're looking for cheap PC games? Check out Kingwin.net. Click the link in the description below to help support the channel and never pay full retail again.
Yo, I'm Brian P. You're watching Bad Seed Tech, and today we're taking a look at the Naga Trinity MOBA MMO mouse from Razer. Now, this was a really eye-opening review for me for a couple of reasons, because number one, these aren't games I normally play, and number two, I have very specific tastes in an FPS mouse. So let's take a look at specs and design first, and then we'll get into a little bit of usage situation and theory a bit later. So we're looking at 119 millimeters long, 74 millimeters wide, and 43 millimeters high. The body reaches peak height right under the first knuckle of my index finger, and you can tell it's meant for a 1-2-2 grip because it has a little groove on the outside that cradles your ring finger. With a palm to fingertip measurement of 21 centimeters, it puts me somewhere between a hybrid of a claw and a palm grip, leaning a little more towards the palm, so make sure you adjust accordingly based on your hand size. You've got the RGB Razer logo on the rear of the body, and the material used here is the same matte black plastic that you see on the majority of Razer's mouse offerings. The triggers also have really comfortable finger grooves. The switches here are Razer's own mechanical switches. The USB plug here is black chrome with a Razer green insert, and the cable is braided, thin, and flexible. Not nearly as stiff as some I've had my hands on lately. It's a really solid, stable design, if not a little wider than most. It feels a lot like the MM520, but it's longer and heavier. This guy weighs 120 grams, and there's no adjustable weight system of any kind. It's a really comfortable mouse, but it's really big and it's really heavy, so be ready for that. The scroll wheel is RGB lit and it's rubberized with tall ridges. It's got a little audible click to it when you scroll, it depresses easily, and it features tilt scroll, which is not something I usually see on a gaming mouse. Right behind the scroll wheel, you've got designated buttons for DPI up and down. The bottom of the mouse has one large glide across the rear and two in each of the top corners. You also see a profile select button there with an LED indicator to let you know which you've got selected. So despite having to program this mouse initially in the Synapse 3 software, you can store up to 4 profiles on the mouse. And once you've got them all locked in, you're good to go. At this point, you can either delete the software from your system if you wish, or you're ready to go for any other system that you plug into. There are a few restrictions to the stored profile mode, specifically with regards to lighting. Namely, you can only use the 4 simple lighting modes when you're storing the profiles, i.e. reactive, breathing, cycling, and static. There's no configurable options, and you can't assign any of the RGB zones independently while you're using these modes. And if you do plan to remove the software or you're using this mouse on the go, you need to be aware that the lighting profiles, even the simple ones, do not travel with it. It will retain all your DPI information and button assignments and that sort of thing, but it will default to color cycle anytime you plug it into a different system where Synapse 3 is not present. The advanced chroma lighting effects here are global across all profiles, so whether you're on a Synapse 3 system or not, whatever advanced chroma effect you have in place affects every profile. The last thing here that might cause you some confusion is that if you are hooked up to a Synapse 3 system and you're using the profile select button on the bottom, that LED indicator is not going to change color. All that takes place on screen. That LED indicator only kicks on if you're plugged into a system that does not have Synapse 3 software present. I know that's a long way around to go to just talk about storing profiles, but these are some of those real-world ownership things that only crop up like a week or two after you've owned it. I feel like it's important. That brings us to the thumb side of this mouse, which is arguably the money shot. Over the years, the Naga's been available in a couple different configurations, either like a 12-button phone dial configuration or a 7-button circular hex configuration. The beauty of the Trinity is that it allows you to switch between either of these two, as well as a 2-button FPS that's pretty similar to the side of a Death Adder on the fly. And the way it does it is extremely well executed. There's a little ridge on the underside of the mouse right on the side plate. You just hook a thumbnail into there and it just pops right off. The mouse powers down when it does so. You slap your new side plate on and the mouse powers back up and it automatically knows what side plate it's got installed. There's 4 magnets that hold it on the side, one at the front, one at the rear, and then there's 2 magnets each on the side of the PCB behind the little protective cover. They did a great job with this implementation. It's really secure, and the tolerances on the molds of the plastic are so tight that if you walked up cold on this mouse and had no idea it had this functionality, you wouldn't know. The 2-button panel's pretty standard stuff here. There is no RGB lighting, but you do get a nice rubberized grip here on the side, as well as 2 curved thumb buttons that feel ideally placed to me, and the button action on them feels really good as well. In practice, this is the easiest side panel for me to use because it allows me to apply pressure to the mouse with the entire length of my thumb, which makes liftoff and repositioning the mouse a lot easier. You will get some frame creak here if you really wrench down on this thing, but unless you grip your mouse like you're crushing walnuts in your hand, it's not going to be an issue. The hex panel has 7 buttons that are RGB lit, as well as a little rubberized disc right in the center of those buttons. So your grip style here becomes a little more deliberate. You got a couple options. You can either grip this thing with your thumb pointing directly in towards the mouse, in between all 7 buttons, or you can park your thumb just forward of the buttons. It's gonna fall between the 1 and the 4. The latter of these 2 options is the most effective if your play style requires a lot of lift off and reposition. With the hex panel, I'm not actually able to lay my thumb across these buttons on the side without accidentally triggering them. They are pretty sensitive. I could see this being a really cool setup for a weapon wheel or a designated weapon select in a shooter, but in practice there's gonna be a pretty good learning curve trying to figure out which button is where in the heat of the moment. Moving to the 12 button panel makes things even dicier for me trying to locate proper thumb placement. I can park my thumb completely forward of all the number keys, and that allows me to get some lift off there, but to truly make the most of this setup, you're gonna wanna use a really high DPI setting so that you don't have to lift off or reposition the mouse very often. If you have a really light touch here, you might be able to get a little lift off just by resting your thumb across the lower row of buttons. They require a little more deliberate force to actuate than they do on the hex panel. It's also kind of cool that the number 2 is flared out here just a little bit. It's different than the rest of the rows, so you can kind of like learn to find a home row and then find your way around on the pad based off that. It's a subtle detail, but it's appreciated. So it should go without saying, but all these buttons we've seen so far can be reassigned. And not just to obvious gaming functions either. As an FPS player initially, honestly, I was baffled at who would need this many buttons on their mouse, so I took to Twitter to find some people that played MOBAs or MMOs or that owned a mouse that was similar in design to this and picked their brain. And I came back with some answers that were definitely not immediately obvious to me. Some people played MOBAs and MMOs and didn't use these buttons at all. They just rebinded everything they needed on their keyboard. Some people had a keyboard that didn't have designated macro buttons, so they used it in place of that. Others, like me, used a TKL and they didn't really have an excess of keys on the board to be reassigned in the first place, so it worked out great. Others used it for push to talk during game, which I thought was brilliant. Still others used it for streaming to trigger scenes via OBS, and some people even used it for video editing. So it's really versatile. Time is money when you're editing videos, and I'm constantly looking for ways to not have to move my hands off the core functions when I'm editing, because it just makes you faster. Couple that with the tilt scroll feature and the comfort of this mouse, and you start to get a pretty serious editing mouse on your hands here as well. And the sensor here is Razer's own 5G sensor that they rate all the way up to 16,000 DPI, so you're able to span multiple high-resolution displays with ease. And it works great in gaming too. It's deadly accurate. Mice of this caliber, you should not have to worry about spin out or angle snapping or weird acceleration issues, and all that holds true here. I didn't have any of those issues whatsoever with this mouse. At a street price of $99, it's not a cheap mouse, but the build quality here is exceptional, and it's really adaptive for a variety of use situations. The only caveat I have here is that it is really heavy at 120 grams. That might be a factor for you in FPS use. Inside the Synapse 3 software, not only will you find all the lighting controls and profile selection, but you'll also find the ability, obviously, to assign DPI levels and reassign these different buttons to weird stuff like triggering different programs or opening specific web pages. It also has DPI clutching, which is like a sniper button, or also known as DPI switching. It also has Razer's Hypershift, which is their implementation of being able to select a secondary set of button functions by holding down one button on the mouse. By now, you've probably picked up on the fact that I'm specifically saying Razer's Synapse 3 software. The reason why is because it is their newest software and it's still in beta. I'll put a link in the description below to the latest compatibility list, but the reason why this is important is because if you're using an older legacy Razer peripheral that only uses Synapse 2 in conjunction with a newer peripheral that uses Synapse 3, there's a small chance you may find yourself with 2 versions of Razer software installed on your system simultaneously as they work through the migration. So that said, when you take all that customization available in the software and the ability to not only switch profiles but physical side plates on the fly, you come away with arguably the most feature-rich gaming mouse I've ever had on my desk. And my desk has seen a lot of action. What does that even mean? Honestly, the only things I would change with this mouse, were it up to me, I'd really like to see it come in closer to the 100-gram mark to be better used in FPS scenarios, but I'm no engineer. I don't even know if that's realistic given the amount of hardware that's stuffed inside this thing to handle the plate swaps. If we're gonna have a mouse this heavy and this large anyway, I would have really liked to see a dedicated sniper button on the FPS side panel. Now, that's a really polarizing choice, and I know not everybody is really into the whole sniper button thing, but I like it. I don't care who knows. Lastly on my wish list, I'd also like to see the ability to take not only simple profiles, but advanced chroma lighting profiles with me on the go, stored on the profiles, on the mouse, regardless of what system I plug it into. One of my favorite mice from another manufacturer's managed to pull this off, so I would really love it if Razer could sort that out. So there you go. If you've only got room in your budget or on your desk for only one mouse, albeit an expensive one, and you want to do a variety of tasks, or you play different types of games, or you simply want a really well-built, well-engineered mouse to tackle some MMO or some MOBA games, the Razer Naga Trinity should be able to handle literally anything you can throw at it, and then some. And that's it for this time. Big thanks to Razer for sending this out for review. Also like to give a big shout out to my dudes Chris Allman, John Mellinger, and Iconic Mods for giving me some very candid feedback on how they implement this mouse. It really helped out the review. Thanks a million, boys. I'm Brian P. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button, hit that sub button, and until next time, stay up. One, Now by now you've probably picked up the only reason why this is important, and I will put it installed in your system as the motherfucker. Come on.